This happened about 10 years ago now. At the time, I was dating my now husband, and we had planned a dinner with his family at his mother's house. The dinner was set for a Friday, and being that we were going there after work, we drove in our separate cars. His mother didn't live in the best of neighborhoods, but I also wouldn't call it ghetto by any means. When I arrived with my two sons, there wasn't any parking on her street, so I was forced to instead park on the side street next to her house. As I was parking, I noticed how odd it was that her street was just chock full of cars, but this side street I had parked on was basically empty other than the houses. After getting out of the car, I was carrying my 2-year-old son while my 10-year-old held my hand. I noticed a white pickup truck start driving toward us at a very slow pace. The person inside didn't appear to be looking at the houses or anything, as someone would be if they were looking for an address. Instead, he kept his stare directed on us. As I kept walking to turn the corner to my mother-in-law's house, the man drove right past us, never once taking his glare off of us. I locked eyes with him as I went into protective mommy mode. He turned away and kept on driving. After a few hours, it was late and dark outside, and we were all just about ready to leave. My 12-year-old stepdaughter wanted to ride home in my car this time instead. I told my husband it would be fine and I would just meet him at home since he was still saying his goodbyes, and he wasn't completely ready to leave yet. As we walked over to the car, I had my 2-year-old I was carrying while my stepdaughter and son were now walking next to me. As we turned the corner though, I saw my car, only to see the same white truck parked right behind it now, with the creepy guy in his car with his truck still running. There weren't any other cars parked on this particular street either, so there was no reason he had to park directly behind my car. I told the kids to be very careful and stay close to me. As we started to get closer, I could see his eyes lock in on mine. Neither he nor I was going to look away. I could see pure evil on his face. His expression never changed, and his eyes started to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. At this point, the kids also took notice of this man and started to get scared. For a split second, I questioned if I should just walk back to my mother-in-law's house, but for whatever reason, I kept on walking to my car. As I got to the back passenger side to open the door to put my son in, the man reached out his rolled-down car window to unlock his driver's door, all the while not taking his eyes off me. As he got out of the car, before he even had a chance to run up to us, I screamed as loud as I could for the kids to run. I started running, still with my younger son in hand. My stepdaughter and older son were in front of me, attempting to run away. As I was running, I turned around, and sure enough, that creep was now chasing after us. My 10-year-old was slowing down. I gave him a little push while yelling at him to run. I was yelling at the top of my lungs now, yet no one came out of their house to help. Right before I turned the corner, I noticed a patch of grass. I thought I was going to have to lightly throw my son there and let this creep catch up to me, since he was now gaining on us. As a mother, I would of course rather him hurt me than any of my kids. Right before I had to do this though, I saw my husband run out of the house with his brother, since his daughter had made it inside crying and telling him someone was chasing us. They ran out, and the guy took off before they could even get a glimpse of him. The creep left his truck running, and he was now nowhere in sight. We called the police, and when they examined his still running vehicle, they found his wallet, rope, and Clorox right in the front seat. The cops said whatever he was planning was not good. They eventually did find him hiding underneath a car in a neighbor's driveway. They asked my stepdaughter and I to identify him. We were so shaken up that just seeing him again made us upset. The man was then taken away, and I couldn't sleep for days after. I found later after his arrest that his fingerprints came back as a suspect in an unsolved murder. Even after all these years later, it still scares the hell out of me. I can't imagine what would have and could have happened to us that night, but thank God nothing did. Now, before we start, some backstory. This was many years ago. I was around 12 or 13 years old, I think. I grew up in a very small town, technically a village even, about an hour and a half away from a big city in the US. On summer days, my best friend and I would venture around our woodsy neighborhood and do the typical kid things. I had a little sister who was around 7 or 8 at the time, and she also had a little sister the same age. My friend's name was Sarah, my little sister Sammy, and her little sister Alex. Occasionally, we would let the little ones tag along on our adventures, especially if our parents made us. Our favorite thing to do, though, was to walk around to our other neighbor's house, we'll call them the Smiths, and use their trampoline. It was technically in our neighborhood, but the houses were all pretty far spread out with dense forest in between. We'd set off towards their place, and it was about a 20 or 30 minute walk, longer on the way back because we had to go uphill on that way. Well, one day, Sarah and I decided to let Sammy and Alex come to trampoline with us. They weren't really allowed very far from our houses without an adult or us with them, so they didn't get an opportunity to do it very often. We played on it for about an hour or two when we decided we were all really thirsty and hungry. We decided to head back to Sarah and Alex's house for some snacks. We were almost completely back there, but the last stretch before their house was the longest amount of isolated road. There was a creek flowing by, and no houses lining any of the road, just dense forest. As soon as we cleared this area, we would be basically right on top of their house. We were almost through the wooded part. We could even see their house up ahead, when a woman with short black hair and sunglasses walking her baby in a stroller passed by. She was walking towards us and would be arriving very quickly. I didn't recognize her at all as someone who lived in our neighborhood, and I knew everyone there. I supposed, though, that lots of people from surrounding neighborhoods might take walks here and there because of the scenic woods. She passed us by fairly normally, but right after she did so, she turned around immediately. "Oh, hey kids, I'm a little bit lost. Do you know what road this is?" None of us were very alarmed. The neighborhood could be windy and confusing. Plus, she was a lady with a baby, not some creepy, scary man. We told her the name of the road, and she informed us that she was really lost. She needed to get home right away to take care of her baby. She then asked if we could escort her to her house, because she didn't think she'd be able to find it even with directions. Sarah, being ever helpful, agreed to help immediately, but I felt really uncomfortable about this. We had always been told never to talk to strangers, even if they were women. I told the lady none of us could help, because Sarah's dad was expecting us home soon. At first, Sarah gave me a weird look. I think she caught on, though, because she agreed with me to the lady. At this point, I wasn't really freaked out. I just knew that nobody should probably be helping strangers to their house through the woods. I went to step in front of the younger two. They were trailing behind us, and I wanted to push them forward so we could start walking away immediately. In my efforts to do this, I had to step a bit closer to the lady, and from the point I was at, I could get a good look into her stroller. My heart immediately sank. The baby was clearly a fake. It was a baby doll, wrapped up in blankets. I could still see the sheen of the plastic, though. At that point, I didn't know what to do. I mean, who's been in this situation before? I found myself screaming at everyone to run. I made sure Sammy and Alex were ahead of me, and we sprinted for their house. Her dad was working in the garage on something. We ran in out of breath and sobbing. I quickly just told them there was a lady trying to get us to go home with her, who had a fake baby. He grabbed a golf club from his caddy that was lying out, and told us to get inside the house. We all went inside. A few minutes later, her father returned. He said he was heading towards the lady when she spotted him. She had already been on the phone with someone. Out of nowhere, a white van screeched up. She threw the stroller in and they sped off together. It was definitely a really creepy experience. I don't know what that lady's intentions were, but I know they were not innocent. It truly scared the shit out of all of us. We didn't wander around that neighborhood nearly as much after, and when we did, we were always on the lookout for anything suspicious. Hello there, my name is Zach. The reason I'm here is to tell the story of some events that really creeped me out in the past. Now, this all started in the summer of 2015, back when I worked at the Walmart of my town pushing around carts. I'm not sure the exact date it all started, although I do recall it was sometime around the 4th of July, I believe. It all started with a simple call over my radio, with a request to help someone load their items into their car. Glad to get out of the hot summer heat if only for a few moments, I responded quickly, saying I'd be right there. And I hurried right in. I walked over to the register where the customer had requested assistance. The customer was a heavy-set middle-aged man who had purchased a 52-inch flat screen. I greeted the man with a warm hello and smile, which he returned as well. The man stood at about 6 foot 8 inches and spoke with a deep southern accent. He kindly offered his hand for me to shake, which I did before he led me to his van. On the way, he made a bunch of small talk with me, asking how my day was, how old I was, if I liked my job. I answered all his questions very honestly, saying my day was going fine so far, I was 19, and there was worse jobs to have than this one. We got over to his gray van and worked together to load this big-ass TV into the back. Before parting ways, the man asked me where I lived and if I lived alone. This wasn't unusual, as a few other customers had asked me this before in the past. I simply said no. I stayed with my grandparents, having been too poor to afford to live by myself at that time. I lived a mile or two outside of town. I took the man's card away, wished him a good day, and walked off. It was only a few days after that I realized whenever I would be working, that gray van would always be in the lot. I didn't really think too much of this at first. It wasn't unusual for some people to shop at Walmart every single day, especially for menu planning and such, so I would just go about my workday. That was until about a week afterward, when after noticing that same gray van, I turned to a fellow cart pusher named Joe. "Man, that gray van is always here, huh?" Joe nodded in agreement. "Yeah, I know, dude. Although, it's kinda strange. I only think I've ever seen that van here when you're working." Confused, I asked him what he meant. "Well, I mean, I only ever see it here during your shifts. It always leaves right after you do when you clock out." I found that to be a little bit strange, but blew it off as a coincidence for now. One day, though, I started to notice that this gray van seemed to be following me everywhere I went. I don't own a car, so I basically walk everywhere I go. I don't really mind as I enjoy it and it clears my head. I tried, again, to chalk the van always following me as a coincidence. I was pretty sure it must just be headed in the same direction, right? Wasn't exactly like there were a ton of places you could go around here. Although I always did find it odd that the van would never drive past me as I walked, but always hung back, not even caring if it was holding up traffic. The red flag started really going off when I spotted that gray van trailing me on a Wednesday night as I was walking back home from my youth group meeting at church. At first, I just brushed it off as usual until it started to follow me on my way out of town. Normally, it would always turn away when I got to the city limits, but this time it continued to follow me. I started to feel as though something was not right about this, and began to wish I had taken my pocket knife with me just in case. The van followed me all the way till I walked to my driveway, before finally driving off. I had gotten real chills at this point, and made sure to lock all the doors as I entered my home. The very next night, I was walking home in the dark once again after a men's group Bible study. The memory of last night was burned in my mind. I had decided that if the van followed me again, I would notify the police in the morning. Sure enough, it did end up trailing me. I gritted my teeth, sick of whoever this fucker was. However, the van now pulled a few feet ahead of me and stopped. The driver's side door opened, and the customer I had helped with the TV stepped out and approached me. He greeted me like everything was normal about this and asked me where I was headed to. I told him I was going home, making a mental note to tell the police about this man first thing in the morning. The man continued to act friendly and offered me a ride home, stating it was too dark for me to walk home and that some weirdos might try something. I declined, saying I didn't live that far away, but the man kept insisting it was too dangerous and I needed to ride with him. The more I said no, the more he kept on pushing for me to get into his van. It was at this point I decided I was done with this. I started to walk past the man when he grabbed me forcefully on my arm and started pulling me towards his van, stating he was giving me a ride whether I liked it or not. Being a young 19-year-old man, I had always thought I would be able to easily handle a situation like this should it ever happen. However, panic immediately took hold over my body. My mind raced to find a way to get away from this guy, pretty sure that wherever he wanted to take me, it sure as hell was not my house. Now, I don't know if it was a miracle or just plain luck, but at that exact moment, a police car happened to drive by and pulled into the nearby gas station to fill up. The man immediately let go of my arm, wished me a good night, and got into his van and sped off into the distance. I decided to talk to that cop right then while he was getting gas, telling him about what just happened and the past events. The cop was nice and ended up driving me home, telling me if I ever saw the guy again to immediately call the police this time. It's been months now and I haven't seen him ever since. Eventually, I quit my job and moved to another state starting college. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened to me if that cop hadn't happened to drive by that night. Since I was trapped inside all weekend, my family and I started bringing up random stories, and my mom reminded me of a very creepy thing that happened when I was about 7 or 8. This was back when I lived in the city. Now I live in the suburbs. My mom and I were going to the dollar store because she wanted to get some cheap decorations for some holiday. I don't exactly remember which one it was. Anyway, we walked into the store, and she was grabbing her decorations and slamming them down in her cart. I was getting extremely antsy, so she told me I could go to the toy aisle and grab something, but only one thing. She made that very clear. I happily ran into the toy section and began searching all the Barbies I could choose from. As I started looking, though, I could tell that there was someone behind me. I moved forward because I thought I must have been blocking the aisle in my excitement, but the person behind me didn't move at all. I turned around, only to see an older man with a balding head and reddish-brown beard staring down at me. The man didn't say anything, and neither did I. He stared at me like he was extremely angry with me, glaring into my face. He reached his hand out and put it down on my shoulder. I froze immediately. I was a very shy kid, so I turned bright red, grabbed a random Barbie, broke free, and ran back to my mom. I didn't tell her what happened, though. I just stood with her as she continued to shop. I kept on searching around because I had become very paranoid. What did I do? Why was this man so mad at me? I didn't really understand what had just happened. My 8-year-old mind started to forget it, though, while my mom continued shopping. When she was done, we headed over to the checkout and hopped in line. I was staring blissfully at my new Barbie when I saw that man get in line right next to us. The way the dollar store lines are set up, there are 2 lines next to each other with 2 checkout desks that face each other. The point is, he was now only a few feet away from me, looking directly at me. I started feeling uncomfortable because this man was once again staring angrily at me. He was in line with his things, but he never broke his stare on me, even when the line started to move. The way he was looking at me was just giving me chills. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I started to tear up because I was very sensitive, and I started to freak out. My mom noticed I was getting upset and asked me what was wrong. I didn't say anything, but she took the hint and looked over, only to see the man glaring a hole through me. His expression was now more of a "I'm going to cook you and eat you for dinner" stare. Even my 8-year-old mind knew this was not good. My mom looked nervous and put me on the opposite side of her. She told me to ignore that man because clearly he was a pervert. She wasn't quiet about this either. I didn't really know what to do, so I just listened to my mom. Finally, we were next to check out of the store. Sadly, so was he in his line. My mom quickly paid and we started speed walking towards our car. I could tell she was creeped out by the man too. She kept on looking behind her as we walked away. We got into the parking lot, and of course that man was following close behind. My mom was not shy at all. She would make a scene and not even care. She was tough as nails. As the man continued to follow us, she finally turned around. "Hey, pervert! Why don't you fuck off and stop staring at my daughter?" My mom was the type of person that was going to get herself in trouble one of these days, because she didn't know if that man had a gun or a weapon, or what he would do when she said that. Anyway, the guy immediately stopped walking, but kept staring so intensely. It was insane how well I remember his face now. His eyes looked like they were about to pop out of his head. The psycho then decided to put his hand down either his pants or on his crotch. I can't quite remember which. My mom gave him the finger, then got in her car, and we quickly drove away. The man was standing in the same spot, not even moving. He was right in the middle of the road we needed to drive down, so my mom drove her car up to him and began beeping obnoxiously. Still, the man did not move. My mom floored it past him, just barely missing running him over, and took a deep breath once we left. I remember what she told me when we were finally relaxed in the car. That's basically when I learned what a child molester is. I asked her why he was staring at me like that. She said it's because he was a pervert who liked little girls. I didn't really know what she meant though. Obviously, I didn't know she meant sexually, so I asked why he liked little girls. She told me, because he's a pedophile who will do bad things to you, so never talk to strangers or go off with strangers like that. Do you understand? I nodded, and that was it. It was such an odd experience. Was the man mentally ill or something? Why did he think he could follow me so openly? I really have no idea. I worked as a Walmart cashier for a little over a year or so. I quit in August of 2015 when I went away to college. As a cashier, you see a lot of people in a day, especially at Walmart. After a while, you don't even really see people's faces when you look at them. There are some people, though, that you see so often, you start to recognize them, and sometimes even learn their names. There was this one guy, always in the same Green Bay Packers hoodie and Chicago Cubs baseball cap, that would often seek out my line no matter how long it was, just so he could stare at me and not even say a word. Whenever he did say anything to me as well, he would always lean across the register to get closer to my face. The guy always gave me a really bad vibe, but when I asked the other cashiers about him, they said he had never been weird around them. One of the girls even said he was a close family friend. After that, I decided to drop the issue. One night, after I'd been there for about a year, I was working a 2 to 11 shift. Those shifts were always the worst, because you'd be there for 3, sometimes 4 front-end managers. It also took out the majority of the chunk of your day where you can actually do something. So, I'm down on the self-checkout. It's about 10:15, so I'm counting the minutes until I can shut it down at 10 till 11. The creepy guy comes in the front door and makes a beeline for me at the self-check podium. When I see him come in, I instantly got nervous. "Hey, can I still buy a phone card and electronics?" I told him I only worked as a cashier on the front end, so I didn't know anything about electronics. He could always go over there and check though. He seemed extremely peeved by this answer, but he did walk away without another word. 10 minutes later, he came up with a prepaid phone card and said there was no one at the register in electronics. I activated his card for him and handed it over to him, telling him to have a good night. He pushed his card back at me without saying a word. "Is something wrong, sir?" "These minutes aren't on my phone yet, are they?" I was confused by this statement. Of course they weren't. He'd just bought the damn thing. I shook my head and he waved his card in front of his face.
Well, why the fuck are you standing there? Reactivate my phone.
When he talked, he was so close to me I could smell his bad breath. I wanted to put in a call to a CSM so someone could come down and help me. This is where I should probably mention that I'm about 5'3", and this guy was like 6'5". He was very stocky as well, so he was towering over me. I'm not gonna lie, the thought he could easily fuck me up crossed my mind, but I get so nervous whenever people yell or cuss at me. My dad was never the type to do that thing, so I'm not really used to it. I took the card out of his hand. He slammed his cell phone down on the scanner. I knew I had never put minutes on a prepaid phone before. I didn't dare tell him that, though, in fear of what he might do. I read the directions, picked up his phone, dialed the number. As I'm putting in the card number, his phone ran out of minutes. I tried to call back only to get an error message. I was completely at a loss. I meekly handed him his phone back and said, I'm sorry, something seems to have gone wrong. I don't really know what's happening. As soon as I said that, he took his phone, opened it up, and tried to dial someone. When it didn't work, he looked at me with furious eyes.
What the fuck did you do to my phone? What the fuck did you do?
His voice was echoing in the store now. Unfortunately, we hadn't gotten to the end of second shift rush yet, so there was no one else around. He closed his phone and opened it again, trying to make another call. When it didn't work, he threw it down on the scanner.
I don't know what you did to my phone, but you better fix it right now or else.
The last part came much more quietly, practically a whisper. At this point, I was worried he was going to put his hands on me or something. I didn't know what to do. I put in a call for a CSM from my register. I've called someone that might be able to help, but we're at a shift change right now, so it might be faster to take it to the customer service desk instead. He picked his phone off the podium, still mumbling under his breath that I fucked up his phone. I was hoping I could get out of there before he came back, or at least have someone else down there with me. Another 15 minutes went by and I didn't see him again. As I'm picking up items that people left by the registers, getting ready to shut them down for the night, he comes back and stands by the podium. He looked so completely pissed off I felt nervous immediately. He made a finger motion to tell me to come towards him. When I was standing in front of him, he leaned so close to my face, I thought he was about to kiss me or bite my face or something. I tried to take a step back, but he stepped into me when I did. A creepy grin came across his face immediately.
That girl up there fixed it. Simple fix. But next time, I expect you to know what to do. Understand me?
I nodded because I didn't really know how to respond to this. He got even closer before saying,
I'm sorry I raised my voice. I never should have done that, especially to a pretty gal like you.
When he added the last part, he lightly brushed his fingertips against my bangs to the side. I took a step back.
Why don't you let me make it up to you? I'm sure we can have some fun.
I shook my head again. I'm only 19, sir.
So, we'll get a couple beers and go back to my place, you know?
Again, I shook my head. No, it's really okay. I'm not much of a drinker. I have an early day tomorrow anyway, so please go. Obviously, he was displeased with this answer.
Well, tell you what. I'll just wait over here by the door in case you change your mind.
I smiled at him weakly and told him to have a good night. When I saw him walk through the security things, I quickly shut down the registers and signed out of mine. I ran over to a CSM to tell them about the entire thing. The third shift CSM looked at me like I was lying when I finished. I know that man, he wouldn't hurt a fly. He doesn't have it in him, you're just being dramatic. She turned to another older cashier behind her, shook her head and mumbled, teenagers. I asked if I could have someone walk with me to my car. They told me that management was in a meeting, and the security guy had gone home already. I clocked out and went to the bathroom. I waited in there for about 10 minutes before coming out and attempting to go to my car. When I walked around the corner through the security things, he wasn't sitting on the bench right there like I had been expecting. I relaxed a little bit. I realized instead he was standing just outside the door, far enough away to keep it from closing, smoking a cigarette. He had his back turned towards me. Luckily, I never went out the front doors. I always went down the corridor and out the side. I quietly closed the door behind me, so maybe I wouldn't catch his attention. I started rushing to my car, which fortunately was very close to the building. As I was speed walking away, I could hear him shout out from behind me, "Hey, why are you avoiding me? Come here now!" At this point, I took off in a full-on sprint, which was not easy because I was wearing Sperry's, so it was kind of like running in clogs. I got to my car, hopped in, locked the doors as I was starting it, and didn't even bother with my seatbelt. By that point, he had made it almost all the way to my car, and was still yelling at me. I took off as fast as I could, and took the longest way home, with the most twists and turns I could find. When I got home, I told my dad about the experience. He was so angry that no one had answered my calls or believed me. He called the store manager the next day and complained. I was never contacted about his complaint. From that night on, though, whenever I saw that guy, I would run to the bathroom, or if I couldn't get away, I would put out my lane closed sign and turn off the lights so he couldn't get in. You always hear people talking about the people of Walmart as being trashy, but they never tell you that a select few are scary as hell. Okay, so a bit of backstory here. I'm 19 now, but I was around 4 or 5 at the time this happened. My parents used to be nudists when I was smaller, and would encourage I and my brother to accept our bodies. He was around 7 or 8 at the time. They also encouraged us not to be afraid to show the skin we were born in, and other child-teaching stuff like that. They informed me that a lot of their reason for being nudists was because of a very manipulative and persuasive friend they used to have, who was into the practice. Nowadays, they're extremely embarrassed about their period as nudists and try to hide the matter from a lot of friends and family. Anyway, my mom and dad both worked a pretty stable job in online accounting back then, so we went on holidays quite often. I used to love going to Spain the most, so we chose to go to Spain that summer. On our 10-day trip there, before we headed off to the US for a weekend, we enjoyed going to the beach almost every day. Of course, at that particular time, my parents loved nudist beaches, not only for people like them, but also to get a perfect lineless tan. So, there we were on the beach. My dad and brother were splashing around on the shore while my mother and I were on some sun chairs, her sleeping and me burying my legs in some sand. I didn't really have anything growing on me back then, so nobody paid much attention to me. They did like to look at my mother occasionally, though. When I informed her about this, we moved our chairs back to a more secluded part of the beach where there were less people around. She fell back asleep. Next to us were a couple, with 2 kids playing behind their chairs. I thought those kids were their kids. The woman looked at me as I reburied my tiny legs in the sand and pointed at me, whispering something to the man next to her. She stood up and hung a towel from the sun umbrella above them. The man reached into a duffel bag next to him, got out some sunscreen, and started to rub it on a sausage-like thing between his legs vigorously. Obviously, I now know what that was. The man was staring intently at me, and even 14 years later, I remember this odd look of determination on his face. He passed the sunscreen to his girlfriend/wife, I guess, and she slipped some in between her legs as well. Even at that age, and with my parents being nudists, I felt an instinct that something was not quite right for them to be staring at me and touching themselves like that. I tried to ignore them and look away, but when I looked back, they were still staring at me. The woman's look was a little softer than the man's. The woman's look was a bit softer than the man's, but really thoroughly creeped me out all the same. What happened next was one of the creepiest things that ever happened to me, and that's saying a lot compared to some of the other things I've been through. The next minute, the woman stopped touching herself and got up. She wiped her hands and area and reached for me, grabbing my arms and shushing me, trying to pull me out of the sand I was buried in. The sand was giving away quickly. I started screaming for my mother. My mom says I was screaming something like, "Mummy help, Mummy help," I don't really remember. It was all a blur to me, as my mom got up and yelled immediately, "¿Qué está haciendo?" at the woman. My mom said the woman immediately let go of me. She tried to explain to her that I had apparently buried myself deep in the sand up to my nose, and she thought I was going to slip under, so she'd simply pulled me out of concern. The sand underneath me was wet, and from my hip upwards I had not a single spot stuck to me whatsoever. Obviously, my mom could tell she was lying.
"Your daughter is very pretty, ma'am. We meant no harm,"
the man said, unaware he was still rubbing his nether regions as he was saying it. At that point, my mother lost it. "What the fuck did you just say? And what are you doing right now, you disgusting old twit?" The man realized and removed his hand from his inner thigh.
"Oh, just sun cream, keep the old sun from burning me. Rubbing it in." Do you like hip-hop? That's what I said."
My mother reminded him his wife had draped a towel that was blocking all the sun, and the man blushed profusely. She spat in the woman's face, grabbed my hand, and dragged me away very quickly. We got to my brother and dad, and she told my dad what had happened. He stormed over to the lifeguard and explained the situation very shortly to him. Then he and the lifeguard went to where our stuff was. The couple had long since fled. All that was left behind were their seats and the 2 kids. My mom scoured through our beach bag for her cell phone to call the local police station, but her phone was now missing, and so was my dad's wallet. The lifeguard radioed into the beach kiosk to call the police and to play on the speakers placed on the bars around that 2 kids were unaccompanied and their parents needed to come collect them. In about a minute or so, a woman came rushing up crying, tears in her eyes as she scooped up the 2 kids. They must have been around 2 years old. She held them, crying her eyes out. She thanked the lifeguard and my parents and told us her husband had fallen asleep while watching them. We told her the couple must have taken them away and moved them to the new spot. She had her cell in hand, and she was just about to call the police. My mom told her to do so, and the lifeguard offered to drive us all down to the station, including the woman and her husband, as his shift was about to end. We all changed and drove down there. In the end, my parents and the nice couple gave their statements. 2 days later, that couple was caught in a hotel, offering kids around a pool sprites that had been apparently drugged. That couple from the beach admitted to being child fetishists and were arrested for many charges like child abduction. They were even found with a kid in their hotel room. Attempted kidnapping, child molestation, trespassing, amongst many other things. My dad says they were deported back to somewhere near Bradford but ran away before court was due. I don't know if they're still out there. I hope that they're deeply behind bars now. Okay, so this happened to me last night. It was 11:30 p.m. or sometime around there at least. This highway was under construction, 1 lane and 2 concrete walls on either side of me. There was this huge truck in front of me and I couldn't see past him at all. We were going about 70 miles per hour and there were no vehicles behind me. All of a sudden this guy locked his brakes in front of me, so I came to a stop behind him. I didn't really think anything of it. I just thought maybe another vehicle had stopped in front or something. We continued on our merry way, only to stop again a few minutes later. I still didn't think anything of it yet, due to the fact that I couldn't see past his car at all. At this point though, the road widened to 2 lanes, shoulder and regular. I pulled into the shoulder lane to see past him. I could see there was not anybody else in front of him for miles. I pulled back into my lane and he stopped yet again. I was starting to think this was really weird. After a few minutes of this, the man began to weave in between the 2 lanes. He'd keep on stopping in front of me, forcing me to stop as well. I grabbed my phone at this point and dialed 911 in, but I didn't press the call button just yet, as the truck in front of me had begun driving normally. Now, I own a Volvo racing vehicle, a V70R, so whenever I get into a situation like this, like huge traffic, start-stop, I put one hand on the steering wheel and one switching gears manually. I set my phone down for a moment to get up to speed. We get up to 70 miles per hour once again, and I pick up my phone. He slams the brakes at this point, and my phone goes flying across the car. I didn't have a chance to click call yet, and now my phone was amongst the floorboards somewhere. The man just keeps stopping and starting again, getting up to 50 sometimes before he'd stop on a dime. At this point, I thought that if there was a car behind me, they would have definitely rear-ended me multiple times. Now, I understand at this point you're probably wondering why I didn't just pass this guy by. Well, I did attempt it multiple times, especially while stopped. He would just immediately pick up speed again and cross into the lane I was attempting to pass him in. He would always keep blocking me off. I decided to try again one more time when we got back up to 70 though. I gained the courage to pass him by and got about halfway up his truck, about 3/4 of the trailerway, before he rapidly began to turn to the right. Not slowly or gradually, but immediately as soon as I began to pass him, I slammed on my brakes. I couldn't slow down any faster. I knew if he hit me at this point, I would go into the concrete wall and go airborne. I was trying my very best to avoid that. I was only about an inch away from taking out my left view mirror. I was that close to the wall. His back tires just barely missed me. They were only an inch or so away. Thank God I hadn't been going any faster and didn't make it any closer to the cab, because if I did, I don't think I would have been typing this up. I was pretty sure at this point his goal was to kill me. A few minutes after this, it finally split into 3 lanes, and I passed him by, speeding off into the distance as fast as I could. I really don't know what was wrong with that guy. I'm writing this because of a particular person that gives me anxiety and flashbacks to one of the most horrific nights of my life. She, to this very day, tries to contact me on every type of social media and doesn't get the hint that I don't want her in my life. This person is my dad's ex-girlfriend. I'll call her Jessica for the rest of this story. Some background on her real quick. She apparently was a friend of my dad's in high school and rekindled some sort of relationship between them. My parents are divorced, and at the time of this story, I wasn't allowed to contact my own mother for legal reasons. This meant I was in my father's care. My dad is a very emotionally abusive person, and we never talked much, nor did we do so much of anything but scream and fight at each other. He definitely was not Father of the Year material, and would leave me home for hours at a time alone. He also did this to his girlfriend Jessica. Now, Jessica was not the sweetest person either. She had this attitude about her that just screamed, "I'm better than you." She really thought she was the hottest woman in the entire world, even though she looked so plain. She would constantly start drama with the other housewives in the neighborhood and gossip about them. Sure, some days she was a nice person, but others she was even more loathsome than my father. She and my dad would constantly fight over the way they treated each other. I didn't really pay much attention to it, but it would eventually all come down to a boil. It was the week of my 16th birthday. My father was in California to deliver some person's horses for a horse show or something, so he couldn't be there at the time. This meant I was left with Jessica, the dogs, and my bird. That Friday, the day he would be coming back, I was fiddling with one of the presents and it was becoming late into the night. I was in my bedroom passing the time until I heard rustling noises coming from my dad's room. And then I heard this sort of weird groaning, screaming noise. Of course, I was legitimately worried. Those noises were definitely coming from Jessica, and it sounded like she could have gotten hurt. What I didn't know, however, was that she had been drinking quite heavily. She started screaming like a banshee. I was afraid to even go near that room. So I called out to her. "Hey, Jessica, are you all right in there?" Apparently, that was an invitation for her to come running at me. So here I was, a defenseless girl, facing off against a 50-year-old woman. She started hitting me, trying to scratch at me. I managed to grab her wrists and tried to get her to tell me why she was doing this. She simply looked me dead in the eyes, and with a low, cold voice she growled out, "I'm going to fucking kill you." I'd had enough at this point. I pushed her off of me and raced to my bedroom, locking the door. I didn't realize it at the time, but I should have called the cops. All I did in that moment, though, was just pray for my father to get home soon. Finally, as if God answered my prayers, I heard my father coming through the door. He must have felt the tense atmosphere in the air, because he called out, "What the fuck is going on?" I came rushing out in tears, telling him that it was Jessica, that she'd come out like a madwoman, attacking me and threatening to kill me. I was shaking and terrified. I screamed to him that I wanted her out of this house. I was truly afraid. He stormed past me and up the stairs to their room. I don't remember much, but I assume she tried to blame it all on me. All I remember is that the cops were not called in the end and we just went to bed. That, however, is not the end of the story. The next morning, she came into my room as I was watching TV, asking for forgiveness, acting as if we had just had a girl's spat, rather than her telling me she was going to kill me and even trying to do so. I told her no, of course, but my dad demanded I forgive her or else. So I did. What else could I do? That would usher in the behavior of her doing constant horrible things to me, then acting like it was nothing. Obviously, in the end, she and my father broke up and went on their own separate ways. She really tried to keep in touch with me for whatever reason, and I was nice to her out of politeness. It wasn't until my freshman year in college that she would really start up again. I did have a Facebook at the time, but I never really did anything with it because I absolutely hate Facebook. It was my first few weeks of school as well, so I was really busy and barely checked in. When I did check, I noticed I'd received a bunch of nasty messages from her, all because I didn't accept her friend request in time. She proceeded to tell me I was just as nasty and immature as my father, that he and I used her as a slave, even though I was her bitching buddy as she complained about everything in her life. Also, what struck a note was, she said that if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have even gone to college. Last time I checked, all she did was tell me the school's name. I did the rest myself. I, of course, proceeded to email her and told her to never contact me again and to never contact my dad either. I didn't appreciate her immaturity. I was only being nice to her because of my dad. Other than that, I really never wanted anything to do with her. Ever since that message, for 2 whole years, she would constantly try contacting me on social media, as if nothing had ever happened, and we were the best of friends. Even emailing her or telling her to leave me alone, she would always just say I was being crazy. I had since gotten into contact with my biological mother and told her everything. She flipped out and told me that if the woman contacted me again, she would threaten her with a lawsuit. Then, one day just a few weeks ago, I was on YouTube and I got a message. I'm not exactly the most popular YouTuber or anything, so I don't really know why I would get a message out of the blue. Lo and behold, I check, and it was her. All it said was, "Hello, Lindsay. Nice blue hair." That was my icon at the time. I told her off and called my mother. She was fuming that this woman just would not leave me alone, and get the hint I didn't want to talk to her. My mother told me she was going to handle this all once and for all. Since then, I haven't gotten a message for weeks. I know my mother, so I know she probably didn't do anything illegal, but whatever she did definitely scared her off for good, I think. When I was a sophomore in college, I lived in a small but beautiful historic studio apartment in a small East Coast city that had somewhat of a reputation for crime and danger. The neighborhood I lived in, however, was usually considered one of the good neighborhoods. It was close to the city's university and was mostly all students living there, especially on the street my building was on. My building was a huge 4-story townhouse, if you can really call it that. It was really more of a mansion as a whole, built in 1895. The architecture was really awesome. Built-in bookshelves, huge mahogany pocket doors that slid into the walls, Anyway, the building was not exactly in mint condition, and my landlord, well, he was pretty lazy. He would come by and check up on things, sure, also make promises to get stuff fixed, but he would never really get around to doing much of anything. The apartment I was renting was on the first floor, my front door immediately on the left as you walked in the building's door from the street. Now, this door was the building's front door, which opened from the street to a small lobby area, with only one other door in it, mine. There was a staircase going to the other apartments upstairs. It was huge, heavy, and was never locked. In fact, I don't even think you could lock this door. It wouldn't close all the way because it was so heavy. Basically, the door to my apartment was wide open to the street. I'd asked my landlord countless times to please do something about the front door, but he would always say he would and then never do anything. Well, one night I was getting home from work and it was very late, about 3:45 a.m. or so. I worked as a pizza delivery driver at a place that was open really late every night. I was just sitting on my couch watching a little TV to unwind before I went to bed. I had also gotten totally naked, something I loved being able to do in the privacy of my own abode. Anyway, not 10 minutes since I'd gotten home and sat down, I hear 3 slow knocks at my door. I'm thinking to myself, who the fuck would be at my door at this hour? What could they possibly want? Why didn't I hear the building's main door open like I usually did? Young and naive, I was half scared and half intrigued. I quickly slipped a robe on and crept towards the door, which, by the way, was literally right next to the couch where I was sitting. At this point in time, my door didn't have a peephole, so I had to kind of just take a leap of faith and open it slightly. When I did so, I could see a tall, emaciated, middle-aged man staring me down with low eyes and a grin. He was wearing all black, many layers, with a big black trench coat as well. The very first thing he said to me was, "Can I come in?" With the door barely even open, I got a deep pit in my stomach immediately. No. What do you want?" He just stared into my eyes for a moment, clearly disappointed. "So, I've seen you around." He started to grin again. The pit in my stomach had evolved to a churning sensation, and I was starting to get nauseous. "Yeah, I've been watching you, and I like the way you look, too. So what, you gay? Bisexual?" "I don't know what you want, man, but it's late and I'm going to bed." He kinda nodded and lingered around for a second as I did, watching to make sure I saw him leave the building. Once he did, I closed the door, locked it, and stood there with my hand still on the knob for a good minute or so at least. After I'd snapped out of my shock, I ran over to my couch and pushed it up against the door. I ended up sleeping on the couch that night, even though it was right there. It just made me feel safer, like I could hear if something happened, you know? Well, nothing happened that night. It wasn't until about a week later, on one of my nights off from work, that I was sitting around my apartment winding down after I'd just had some friends over. All of a sudden, I could hear this weird rattling noise coming from across the room. I turned off the music I was playing to find out that it was coming from none other than my front doorknob. I looked at it for a moment confused when I saw both the knob and top lock were jiggling. Someone was trying to get in. Almost like a deer in the headlights, I was kind of frozen there, staring at them wiggle and shake, until I started to see the top lock actually budge and start to turn. I leapt up from my chair immediately and soared to the door, grabbing tightly onto the lock and forcefully twisting it back. The jiggling of the lock and knob stopped. Whoever it was clearly knew I was now there. It was only a second though before they started struggling again, and I had to use all my might to keep it locked. Sweat was dripping down my forehead and my rib cage after 15 seconds of wrestling with this intruder. As suddenly as it had started though, it stopped. I heard the building door open and close, and footsteps running down the stairs of the stoop to the sidewalk. Just like I was before, I was paralyzed with my hands at the door for a good while before I realized I was now crying and shaking, and I would need to call someone. My first instinct was to call the police. In hindsight, I regret this for the following reasons. I was basically having a panic attack while I was on the phone with 911, and actually threw up during the call. I think they just decided right then I was just fucked up or something. When the two police got to my apartment, they stood in my doorway as I struggled to recount to them what happened. I was shaking and crying. I noticed at one point they were both smirking and laughing. One of them goes, "It reeks of marijuana." I basically argued with them after that. Long story short, they just ended up confiscating a bunch of shit from my apartment and basically turning the entire thing into a mini drug bust. They said they weren't gonna charge me with anything, just take all of my shit. Nothing about this attempted break-in besides keep your door locked. I was so devastated and felt helpless. I hate to make this story so long, so I'll try to keep this last part short. Basically, the exact same scenario happened one more time, about 2 weeks from the last one. This time though, instead of calling the useless police, I called my dad, who raced down in an hour with a crowbar up his sleeve. Unfortunately, by the time he had gotten there, whoever it was had already left. They didn't struggle very hard this time. My dad ended up cussing out my landlord and demanding he get the door fixed and install a new lock and peephole for my door. Thankfully this time, he actually did make this happen within a reasonable amount of time. I also got one of those bars you wedge between the doorknob and the floor, as well as an aluminum baseball bat to protect myself with, so I felt a lot better from then on. Needless to say, I ended my lease for that apartment a month early and never moved back onto that street. I never did find out for sure who was trying to pick my locks, but I'm pretty sure it was that guy who had come to my door that first time. It started in a haunted cave on Halloween. Just me and my friend Anna. Me and Anna are total opposites. She's blonde, outgoing, and completely fearless. I'm dark-haired, introverted, and a bit of a people pleaser. Actually, that's how I ended up at this cave in the first place. People pleasing. Anyways, we go through the cave, and honestly, it was pretty awesome. The usual people with chainsaws, screamers, clowns. One clown in particular kept on following us. He wasn't like the other clowns who wore face paint with fake blood splattered all over them. He didn't have a big red nose and clown shoes either. He had on regular tattered jeans, a sweaty white tee, and a clown mask. The mask was pretty detailed though. It had the eyes cut out and a wicked jagged toothed mouth, with blood smeared all around it. It was seriously creepy looking. He followed us all the way throughout the entire house as we giggled and ran until the fog room at the end. Once we made it outside, we went to go get some cocoa and watch the local bands play. While in line though, the clown walked up to us and stood a few inches away from me, breathing in and out so hard his mask was stuck to his face and would release with each breath. Okay, creepy, but still normal enough for this place so far. He walked away and we giggled. He stayed close by though, staring at me. We walked over to the band. He stood right behind me and started to tug on my hair. I ignored it, but he started to tug even harder. Suddenly, he pulled me so hard my entire head whipped backwards. Anna started yelling at him. He let go and walked away, but like before, not very far. She wanted to tell someone, but I didn't. We were at a haunted cave after all, and he probably didn't mean to. She said no, they can't touch you. We walked over to the ticket booth to complain. It went a little something like this. "Ma'am, your clown over there just pulled my friend's hair so hard it almost ripped out." "I don't see any of our clowns around here. They're all in the cave from what I can see." "None of our people walk around out here. They're all behind that rope. You know, families with small kids come for the hayride and bands and stuff." "No, that clown right there did it. How do you not see him?" "Calm down, miss. That's not one of our clowns. Are you sure that isn't a friend of yours?" I just wanted to leave at this point. The clown was still staring, I was now missing hair, and this was no longer fun. Fearless Anna decided to confront this clown. She marched right up to him with me behind her and demanded he take off this mask. He didn't speak a word. He just looked at me. He reached out his hand, but I refused to touch him. He pushed Anna from in front of me and stepped 2 inches in front of my face. He screamed the most terrifyingly psychotic scream I'd ever heard. Everyone turned around to look. The band even stopped playing. Anna grabbed me by the arm and pulled. His stare had me frozen in place. Then, though, Anna surprised me by grabbing my face and slapping me as we started to run. I looked behind. I could see he was still standing there staring at me. Everyone just went back to what they were doing like it was nothing. We got into the car and peeled out of there. Anna kept saying we needed to get the police right away. I told her it wasn't that big of a deal. It was just a weirdo at a haunted cave. No hard feelings for the slap. I guess I was kind of too scared to act. Then, though, she said something that made my blood run cold. The man had a knife. That's why she slapped me and pulled me away. Not from the fear of being screamed at. She saw him holding a knife in his hand. We contacted the police, but they didn't take us very seriously. Now I'm afraid to go to haunted attractions at all. Not because they're particularly scary, but because you can never really tell if someone actually works there or if they're there because they fit in so well. Okay, so I've shared stories before. I was just thinking about all the creepy encounters I'd had, and it struck me that this one probably qualifies as the most creepy. Hopefully, I'm right. This happened about a year ago now. I'm a college student and was basically forced to move out on my own, which I didn't really mind, but that did mean finding a new roommate, which can be a daunting and scary experience. I've had a few weird encounters doing this, but this one surely takes the cake. I posted on Craigslist looking for a bedroom in a shared house or apartment for $300 or less. On my ad, I mentioned, please no phone calls, only texts or email. This was because I find being on the phone with someone I hadn't really had a chance to size up an uncomfortable situation. It's just awkwardness, I guess. Anyway, I got a call from a dude who clearly didn't read the no calls part, which I mentioned because this type of phone call was exactly the reason I didn't like to talk to strangers on the phone. At first, he was very pleasant and normal. He told me he had a room available and all the relevant information and stuff like that. We started to talk about where and when we'd meet up, when he started going on tangents about random things. I'm a combination of too interested in deep conversation and too awkward to end the call, when it started to get real weird. This call went on for 2 hours. He started talking about the meaning of life and all kinds of weird shit. Honestly, this should have been a red flag. I shouldn't have even met him at all. Of course, I also should have grown a pair and just told him I needed to leave. It ended up that he wanted me to meet him at his place and show me the room. I've since learned that you should really insist on meeting in public first. I got to his neighborhood and it was completely run down on a level that made the ghetto I grew up in look like a mansion. Saggy front porches, hot cracked concrete, sad people with old beat-up Lincolns. You get the picture. His house blended right in. The yard was seriously overgrown, and the front door didn't work at all. I went around the back and just looked at the guy standing in the doorway. I saw the kitchen behind him, and it was enough to make me realize I wanted to leave right away. No way in hell was I going in there. You see, the guy in the doorway was a man with a sort of clown-style afro. He was leaning on a cane on his right side. His eyes looked completely crazy, and the house had this weird musty smell even from 10 feet away. Again, I'm a coward, so instead of trusting my gut, I went inside. I was politely thinking, it's okay, it'll be over in 20 minutes and I can just get the fuck out. Yeah, I don't know really what made me think this man who just had a 2-hour conversation with me on the phone about life and philosophy would let me get away that easily. He took me up this flight of creaky steps into a small bedroom with no door and only a mattress on the floor. No way in hell would I live with a 40-something man with no door on my bedroom, but it was a moot point already. I'd made my mind up before I even saw this slave room. I wouldn't have lived there for free, let alone for $200 a month. Things then got real weird. He tried to hold me hostage at this point. I think the man was mostly lonely. He talked about how some of his family members were millionaires. He started to get delusional. He told me about an 18-year-old girl that had also checked out the room and tried to fuck him, how his mom hated white people. It sounded like he sympathized with her as well. I was white, by the way. Obviously, super uncomfortable. Eventually, I was able to find a break in the conversation and flee. I was never so happy to leave a place in my entire life. I don't know if he was necessarily a bad guy or anything, but seeing the area, the room, and everything, it really gave me a bad vibe, you know? In the earliest months of 2014, I started dating my current boyfriend. We hit it off pretty much immediately, which resulted in me staying at his house multiple nights out of the week. Eventually, I ended up living there, sharing a mobile home with him and his father. The neighborhood itself was fairly creepy, one of those unnamed country areas that branched off from a main road. Richard, my boyfriend's dad, would tell me stories about how the entire street was owned by a single man, a guy who had gotten old in recent years and let the land go. As a result, the field beside our mobile home was overgrown with weeds and old trees. He also told me about the strange occurrences, which he attributed to two things: aliens and kids from another neighborhood. Despite his warnings and how creepy the area was, I didn't take him too seriously though. After all, the man's biggest concern was aliens. I was unemployed for a short period of time after moving in, which left me alone in the house while Cody, my boyfriend, and his dad worked. I spent most of my days putting in job applications, cleaning up the house, and reading things online. I guess you could say my presence at the house was pretty predictable at this point, which is the only explanation to this occurrence. On a day just as unremarkable as any other, I sat there reading a book in our bedroom when I heard a car pull up into the driveway. The sound was pretty distinctive considering the area wasn't paved but rather made of gravel. Thinking Cody had come home early from work, I slipped some shoes on and started for the front door, which was on the other side of the house. Before I could reach it though, a knock sounded against glass. The front of our trailer had this sunroom, basically a front porch that was encased in windows, making it so you had to go through two doors before stepping into the living room. Being as paranoid as he was, Richard would usually lock the sunroom door before leaving for work, unless he was in a huge hurry and happened to forget. Still thinking that maybe my boyfriend had come home early from work, I opened the first door to let him in, only to see that it was not Cody at the door. Rather, it was a short Hispanic man I had never seen before. He smiled at me through the glass and nodded, almost as if I was exactly who he'd been expecting to answer. I noticed then that he had one hand behind his back, the other hanging down at his side. I tried not to think too much about it. Behind him in our carport was a white small truck. I could hear the engine was still running. Can I help you?" I tried to make my voice sound as strong as I could, but I could tell it came out a little bit shaky.
"Oh yeah, I'm with the garbage company. I'm here to pick up your trash cans."
I blinked, knowing immediately that this was a lie. Yes, it was common for the garbage company to come pick up trash cans if the bill hadn't been paid yet, but I had gone with Cody just the week before to pay it. Not to mention, the drivers never knocked on the door. They would simply take the cans and leave. I glanced to the left, seeing that our trash cans were still where we always kept them, on the outside of the sunroom, somewhat behind the house. "They're right there. If you need them, then take them." This time my voice was much more assertive, causing my visitor's smile to turn into a frown right away.
"Can I come in?"
he asked. I didn't verbally answer. I just shook my head. My heart dropped as I watched him reach up and grasp the handle of the glass door, pulling on it to open it. The door clicked, obviously locked. The man tried again, this time harder, causing the very metal itself to creak. I jumped back into the house and slammed the front door, locking it with purpose. It was so quiet now that I only noticed two sounds, my heart pounding, and the doorknob to our back door jiggling. There was no way it could have been the guy at the front porch. He wouldn't have had time to get to the back door even if he ran. I screamed out that I was calling the police through the door, baffled at the fact this had all happened in broad daylight. I could hear the truck drive through the carport and into our backyard immediately after that. I took a moment to look through the blinds of the window, watching as a separate man jumped off the back porch and into the passenger seat. To this day, I'm convinced these men knew I was home alone and carefully planned out this attack. One of them was meant to distract me, while the other one was supposed to break into the back door. I still don't know what front door guy had hidden behind his back though. All I can really say is that I'm forever thankful for how paranoid my father-in-law is. Who knows what could have happened if he hadn't locked the sunroom door that day. After my first semester of university at the beginning of May, I decided to reward myself by getting tickets for a band I really wanted to see. They weren't playing in my hometown, unfortunately. The nearest venue they were playing was a small town about 6 hours away by train. I had a friend who attended university in the town who agreed to let me stay with her, so I figured I would be fine to go up there. Now, I had never been to this town before, but having lived in larger cities my entire life, I often associate small town with safety. I declined my friend's offer to drive me to the concert, considering she was studying for finals at that time. Besides, I enjoyed a good walk every now and then. The town was divided by a river, and to cross that river you had to first go over one bridge, then walk through a park on an island, then across a second bridge to get back into town. To get to the first bridge from my friend's university, you had to walk down this nature trail. All of this was extremely lovely as I did it at sunset and it was a beautiful view. I had just emerged from my first winter in a rather harsher environment than I had grown up in, and the whole nature trail/park combo was filled with joggers and children playing. There were squirrels and birds and basically everything I had missed. This is only noteworthy in the fact that I felt completely at ease within this route. I was pretty distracted and didn't pay a whole lot of attention to exactly which path I was taking. The concert didn't let out until probably slightly past midnight. I got to the first bridge, crossed, and proceeded across the island to the second bridge. It was a very nice night out, and I was actually sort of enjoying myself in the warm spring air. That is, until I arrived to a hill I didn't remember walking over on the way there. I stopped at the base of it, feeling that something was off here. Eventually, though, I somehow convinced myself to attribute it to the fact I had somehow forgotten an entire hill. How funny, I thought to myself as I walked up this mystery mound. All my thoughts ceased, though, as I got to the top and found myself looking down the path into an empty carnival, and beyond that the second bridge. A bit of context, I'm a 5'7", 120-pound female, trained as a circus performer pretty much my entire life. This means that whatever extra weight I carry is pretty much all muscle. If nothing else, it serves as a boost of confidence. It also meant I didn't have a particular fear of carnivals or clowns or anything like that. Walking over a hill I didn't remember, to see an entire carnival I never saw before, definitely set me on edge though. I didn't really see any other way around it though. Literally, there was forest on either side. Plus, the bridge was right there. Besides, this place looked completely abandoned for a long time. I started off down the other side of the hill into this creepy carnival, maintaining a quick pace, definitely on high alert. I kept my focus mainly on the bridge I was aiming for. I was most of the way through already when I noticed some people. I saw them from far enough away that I didn't jump or anything like that, but I did stop dead in my tracks immediately. They seemed pretty normal looking by their clothes, but I was too far away to see their faces. They were sitting in whatever was available: lemonade stands, immobile roller coasters, covered picnic tables. I didn't really know what to do about any of this. I'm sure there were much better options available though. In the moment, feeling I had to do something, I started to simply walk forwards again. As I did, I made eye contact with the first one of them I saw and held it as I walked through them. The man I had chosen to look at I remember quite vividly. He looked a lot what I imagined death personified would look like, a gaunt, drawn-out face with no expression of any type, sunken eyes that followed me as the rest of his body stayed motionless. From what I could tell, the rest did the exact same. I was terrified out of my wits, and for some reason, making eye contact with this zombie was the only thing I felt was keeping me safe. I never broke eye contact with him until I reached the second bridge, even so far as to opt to walk backwards down the trail. I turned and crossed the bridge at a sprint, and someone shouted behind me. This only prompted me to run faster. Now, I mentioned that the route from the university to the bridge was a nature trail. This meant that at night it had no lights on it, and it was as black as the void. The trees were covering up the moon and making it impossible to see anything. I didn't care though. I ran down that trail, tripping over who knows what. Anything to put some distance between me and these creepy carnival people. Eventually, I reached a patch of light at the edge of the university and stopped. There wasn't any noise anymore, except for crickets and my own frantic breathing. If any of them had followed me, they hadn't done so for long. I managed to gather myself together enough and remember that I did in fact have a cell phone, which at that point I used to call my friend, and have her meet me at a well-lit spot on campus, populated by studying students. I told her what happened, and her eyes went really wide. As it turned out, unbeknownst to me, there were 2 trails through the park on the island, a north one and a south one. I happened to take the north one on the way there, and had accidentally taken the south one on the way back. She told me that people would never ever pass through that carnival at night, as it was where all the local meth addicts and unsavory people would hang out. They were unpredictable at the best of times, and at their worst, well, muggings were the least of it to say. It seemed I had gotten off extremely lucky. Everything ended up being explainable, but somehow that made it even worse. I didn't sleep very well that night, and when my friend offered to drive me to the train station across the river the following evening, I accepted right away. Last week, I was hanging out with some friends at a local smoke spot. Eventually, at around 1 a.m., I got pretty tired, so I decided to head home while I was still stoned. I wanted to spend some time browsing Reddit before heading to bed, seeing as I was out of my own personal tree at the time. It was about a 30-minute board ride back to my house, but there was a shortcut I could take a little closer to home. It was down this long, secluded bike trail, and would usually cut at least 5 minutes out of the trip, since I was mostly riding downhill on my board. Usually, nobody was ever on this trail, especially not this late at night. It was also pitch black, as there was no lighting on this trail, and it would get especially dark when I got down the middle of it. While riding down this trail, though, I noticed an odd light that looked somewhat like a flashlight just a bit ahead of me. The light then flashed over to me, and immediately went out. I didn't really think too much about it. Maybe it was just some kids smoking on the trail or something, who got spooked when they saw somebody they didn't think would be coming. Probably not that big a deal. I continued riding down, until I got to where I'd be within eye distance of where I'd seen that light. I noticed immediately that I didn't see anybody up or around on the trail where I saw the light. I thought that it was possible the person had continued walking down, but I have pretty good eyesight, and I couldn't see anything that even looked like so much as a shadow ahead of me. It seemed that whoever had been there was now either hiding or had disappeared altogether. Being the paranoid person I am, I got off my board and held it in my hand, just in case somebody there wanted to mug me or something. Of course, in my own head, I assumed it must be a serial killer as well. I'm paranoid as shit naturally, and I was also stoned, so that wasn't really helping much. I continued walking forward with my board firmly in my hand. I noticed next to the trail were some bushes and trees. I thought I could notice a lone shadowy figure. literally standing between a bush and two different trees, looking almost hidden. The oh fuck sensors were immediately going off in my head. I shined the light on my phone in that direction, only to see a middle-aged man, indeed standing there behind a bush, in between the trees, staring at me with this creepy blank expression on his face. There was something extremely sinister about this man, and it made me really uncomfortable. I continued walking forward, panicking like hell inside my mind. I walked past him, expecting him to try and attack me or something, but all he did was silently continue to stare at me, even slowly turning his head to follow me as I moved forward. When I got a short bit of distance ahead of him, I looked back, only to notice that all of a sudden he was now following me at a very brisk pace. I immediately noped the fuck out of there and jumped back on my board. I began to ride away faster than I ever had before. I looked back one last time before I got too far away. The man had stopped following me now, but he was just standing there, in the middle of the trail in complete darkness, staring at me. I got home very shortly after that, and was of course freaked out of my mind. A terrifying encounter I'd rather not ever have again. I grew up in a suburb of LA County in Southern California. It had a very small Midwestern town type of feel, nothing like you would get near the city of Los Angeles itself. I'm a female, and I was about 9 years old at the time this happened. It was in the mid-80s. My parents had bought a house a couple of years prior that was built in the 1930s. There was a big playhouse in the backyard that kind of resembled the main house. It was probably a little over 5 feet high when you walked into it. It was just a room built with the same materials as a house. It had a real roof, walls, plaster, carpet, windows. The original owners had obviously built it for children. My best friend lived next door, and she was a couple of years older than me. Well, we had talked about spending the night in this playhouse for about a year, and we finally got up the nerve to do it. My dad even set everything up for us. He put a battery-operated light in there and cleaned everything up, that sort of stuff. To give you an idea of what the yard was like, there were 2 large orange trees that had dropped several leaves around the yard. It was fenced in, and there was a detached garage that led to the back alley, and a woodshed next to the playhouse that had a gate which also led into that alley. Around the side of the house there was a shorter gate about 3 feet high that led out to the front yard. Everything was very old. We never really closed the door leading from the yard into the garage all the way because it was old and swollen. You had to slam it shut or open it if you latched it. We would always just close it just enough to where it would stick a little bit, but we never had the strength or will to pull it shut all the way. The small gate on the side of the house that led to the front yard was also similarly hard to open or close. That one, though, would always get stuck on the ground somehow. So, nighttime rolls around and we're set up with our sleeping bags, having a great time playing Mad Libs and listening to the radio. All the while, we'd stopped several times, thinking we were hearing someone walk around. A couple of times, I even called out for my dad because it sounded like the footsteps of a heavier person, but no one had answered. It wasn't uncommon for us to spook ourselves out because we were both nuts for horror things. Usually I would open the door and look outside, but something just creeped me out enough to where I didn't want to do that this time. We tried looking out the windows, of course, but we had the light on so we couldn't see out of them very well. Being as young as we were, we didn't really think to turn off the light so we could see things better without being seen. We just sort of brushed it off as scaring ourselves like we usually did. We finally decided to turn off the radio and the light, and just lay there getting ready to go to sleep. Shortly after we did, though, we both sort of bolted upright in our sleeping bags. We said to each other, "Okay, someone really is out there." We honestly just sat there, gripping each other and listening. We had a small terrier, but we ruled out that it was her very quickly. First, you could hear it even from my friend's house next door every time the dog came in and out the door. It was metal and would swing several times. We hadn't heard that dog come in or out. And second, The footsteps we heard on the leaves were obviously not from a dog. They were not from a child either. They were from someone older. We kept on hearing this. They would get closer to the playhouse, stop, then start again and get further away. This went on for what felt like 20 minutes, but was probably closer to 5, when finally it sounded like all hell broke loose. We could hear the dog come out of that dog door and begin barking as if she was snapping right at someone's heels. Then we heard the side gate shoot open. We heard it drag along the ground. We immediately darted out of the door of the playhouse, only to see that the gate was wide open and the dog was running out. The dog obviously could not have opened the gate. The gate had been pulled open toward the backyard. We just started running out toward the front yard, my friend in front of me. The dog was way ahead of us at this point, and we could no longer see her. What I noticed as I was running out was that I could see the door leading from the backyard into the garage, and it was open, about 4 or 5 inches. When I got about to where the side gate was, I heard the garage door slam. We heard running, and saw the dog coming back toward the front yard. My friend grabbed her, and we started ringing the front doorbell frantically. In all this commotion, my friend and I had both commented that it could have been our parents playing a joke on us, trying to scare us, you know, but that was clearly not the case. My mom came to the door half asleep and very confused about why we were out front with the dog. My dad was sleeping upstairs. We woke my dad up to check things out, and when we all went back into the yard, the garage door was indeed slammed shut. There were 2 people out in the yard with us. One clearly ran out the side gate when the dog came out, and the other had most likely hidden in the garage and watched us run off. We figured they were probably who exited the garage slamming the door shut, then either went out the side gate or jumped the fence heading out to the alley. My parents were a bit skeptical of this story. Honestly, I think that for a few minutes they thought we were goofing around. Then my mom swore it was probably just my friend's younger brother trying to scare us. They did not call the police. The next day, though, my mom called my friend's mom. They were best friends after all. Her mom was a bit creeped out because she said her son was home with her all night, and he was not part of any prank on us. We still talk about it to this day with our parents. They now feel that we should have called the police, but hindsight is 20/20 after all. When I was about 6 years old or so, my family went on vacation to the beach in Florida. Now, I'm a lot younger than my siblings, so while they were out doing their own thing with all their friends, I was pretty much stuck wherever my mom would decide to take me. This meant that for the most part, we stayed in the extremely crowded pool area by our hotel, which had direct access to the beach. It's all a bit hazy, but at some point while I was swimming, I looked up to where my mom was supposed to be sitting, and she wasn't there. I was really attached to her at the time, so I got out and started looking around for her. I scanned all the chairs, took a trip around the bar next to the pool, and looked around everywhere else in there, but I just couldn't find her. Well, for some reason, 6-year-old me decided she must have gone down for a walk on the beach without me, so I made my way out of there looking for her. I walked about a half-mile down the beach out of the crowds to a more vacant area. I just remember starting to cry because I really thought I'd never see my mom again. Just as I'd basically given up, a woman and man came up to me. They asked me who I was, if I had any family nearby, and I told them that I was lost and alone, looking for my mother. The couple told me they had just seen my mother, and that they would hang out until she came back for me. Well, these people took me about 2 miles away from the hotel. We walked down the beach to a more residential area. I remember they kept on insisting that my mom was down on the other end of this beach, and they were going to take very good care of me. They tried to get me to build sandcastles with them, play in the water with them, and even told me we could leave to go to dinner, and they'd bring me back right afterwards. I kept on telling them no to all of this. The only thing I wanted was to return to my hotel so I could go up to my room and check for my mother there. That's when they started to get really upset with me. The woman turned to me and said very sternly, "We're going to leave, go get dinner at our house, and we'll bring you back to your hotel afterwards. Got it?" I was starting to get really nervous. I told them I really didn't want to go anywhere with them, and I could make my way back to my hotel all on my own. Then the man spoke up. "You're coming with us for dinner whether you want to or not." He said it in one of those creepy do-it-or-die kind of tones. I don't know, it just kind of stuck with me. Lucky for me, though, I heard my name being called in the distance. It seemed there was a group of people now yelling for me. I bolted over to them, and they asked me who I was. I told them my name, and they smiled a big relieved smile. "There you are. Thank goodness you're all right. There's so many people out looking for you." When I turned around to show the group the man and woman who had been hanging out with me, they were suddenly gone. The group, which was actually made up of hotel workers, took me back to the hotel where everyone was waiting. There was a fire truck, an ambulance, news crews too, all there because I had been gone for over half the day. The entire hotel pool area had basically been shut down in frantic efforts to arrange a search party for me. My mother was sobbing. Thankfully, it all ended up okay. When I told the hotel workers what had happened, they were obviously extremely concerned. Apparently, not even just a week before, a child had gone missing in their beach access area. When that kid had been found, he claimed a man and woman lured him out to their car, where they tried to forcibly take him home with them. That's when he bolted away and found another family for help. I don't know if they ever found that couple in the end, but I sure hope they did. My whole family had gone to the beach one day when we still lived in California. My dad, mom, brother, and I spent half of the day at this busy beach with a lot of people. Later on, though, we split up and went to do our own different things. I don't really remember why. I just know I was with my mom at a different beach, while my brother had gone off with my dad somewhere. The second beach was very sparsely populated. I remember thinking to myself just how strange it was to be at a part of the beach where I had all this room to run around and have to myself. Actually, I was really happy about it. All I really cared about was making sandcastles and looking for those tiny sand crabs to use as my minions. We were there for less than an hour or so before I noticed that my mom and I had swiftly become the only ones left on this beach. It was now getting kind of late in the day, so I suppose that made some sense, until this guy showed up. I don't know where he came from or how long he had been there, but every once in a while I would look around and see this same man standing the same distance away, watching me. Sometimes he would be in a different location when I would see him, but always the same distance and always watching me. I didn't really know what to think of it at first. My mom, however, was watching him very intently. He was a real big guy, a little bit overweight, and probably in his 40s to 50s. All I remember is that he didn't particularly creep me out. I just thought he was a little bit strange, because here he was standing there all by himself, and it didn't look like he was having one bit of fun. I mean, why would a complete stranger spend his entire day at the beach just staring at a little kid? I didn't really get it, but I didn't really care either. Eventually, my mom came up to me suddenly and told me we had to go right now. Well, I didn't want to go yet. I wasn't done playing. For some reason, though, I noticed that my mom did not sound very happy now. Here's where she made a mistake, though. Instead of immediately taking us back to our car so we could wait for my dad and brother to show up once more, she took us into the public restroom so we could wash the sand off and use the toilet before leaving. There was no one else on the beach still, except for that one guy, and certainly no one else in the restroom. Fortunately, she moved us pretty quick, and after a couple of minutes we were out and walking back to the car. When we finally arrived and looked back, though, we both saw that same creepy man walk out of the restroom we'd just been in, the Omen specifically, and stop at the entrance and stare at us. He wasn't there when we were inside. I can only assume he'd snuck around a corner and slipped in right after we had left. I'm not sure how he didn't see us leave first. I just know he came out after us and watched us get into the car. At that point, I finally started to get more than just a little bit weirded out by him. It was more so, though, because my mom now seemed very upset, and I was not used to seeing her this way. Actually, she seemed to be scared and wary. It looked like she was trying to hide most of it and act calm in front of me, but I could just tell. We got in the car, locked the doors, and a few minutes later, my dad and brother showed up so we could finally leave. I could hear her telling my dad what had happened, but nothing was done about that guy. He disappeared immediately after my dad and brother arrived, and since cell phones weren't very common or affordable at the time, it wasn't easy for us to call the police. We just let it go in the end. In the end, this guy didn't get a chance to do anything, so I have no proof he was like a pedophile or anything like that, but I'm confident enough to guess at what his intentions were. I'm very glad my mom was so attentive that day, because I certainly didn't have a single clue what was going on. Every time I think back on it now, it makes me realize just how easily and severely my life could have changed direction or maybe even ended prematurely. So I had just graduated from high school in June, and about 2 weeks later, some friends and I decided to go camp out on the beach and have a bonfire and whatnot. There was a ton of other people there too, so we weren't too worried about some weird shit happening. A lot of them stayed awake at their campsites well into the night. At this age, no bonfire was complete without lots and lots of pot either. So there's about 4 of us, and we're all hotboxing in the tent. We were really turned up, and we're just munching away on whatever we had, while talking and listening to music by the fire. 1 a.m. rolled around and my mom called me, because she suddenly changed her mind and wanted me home. I was way too high though, so I was not capable of leaving just yet. I waited about an hour, and we hopped into my buddy's truck and tore up the beach for the 10-minute drive back to the parking lot where I'd left my car. We got there, I gave everyone a big hug goodbye, and they told me to drive safe, or just bite the bullet and stay with them so I'd be safe all night. I told them I was going to nap in my car for a bit, so I could come down a bit before driving. They all left, and I was there sitting in my car for about 15 minutes. All of a sudden though, I just started getting really creeped out. There was no one in the entire city but me, and it was so dark and eerie. It was very unsettling, to say the least. I thought to myself, man, fuck this, I'm just gonna get out of here to a place that's well lit. I turned on my car and started to back out. I had just started to leave the lot when I noticed a pair of headlights come on the other end of it. Well, shit, that must be the police. But no. I came to a stoplight and looked in my back mirror, only to see it was a jet black sedan. Okay, no big deal. Maybe they just happened to leave at the same time I did. Only, as I began to drive even further, they started to take every turn I was taking. I almost went through the back roads back to my town, but decided the freeway would be safer. As soon as I was on the ramp, I stomped the gas pedal and pushed 95 miles per hour. They kept up perfectly. I tried switching lanes, falling back so I was behind them, but they would match every maneuver I did. All I could do was speed up again. They followed me for the entire 20-minute drive back to my hometown. At this point, I made a bunch of random turns down country roads and was finally able to lose them by quickly turning into a narrow road and hiding my car behind some trees, then shutting it off. I rolled down the window just a bit and watched as they stopped in the street I had turned from, got out of the car, and searched around the entire place. I could see there were 2 men that had to be in their 40s that I had never seen before in my life. My heart was racing so badly, I was praying they would not spot me. As suddenly as they had stopped though, they just got back in and drove off. I waited 10 minutes before getting back onto the road, and I made it home safe in the end. I vigorously locked every door and window when I got inside. Needless to say, I didn't sleep very well that night, and I stared out my window the entire time, just in case they somehow managed to follow me then, too. Just to preface, this story happened when I was about 15 years old. I had gone on a cruise with some family and friends when my parents decided to invite everyone on a huge vacation to the Caribbean. Since we had never really been out of the country before, everyone was very excited. We were set to visit the area of St. Thomas, St. Martin, and Puerto Rico, not in that particular order. Each morning during the week, we would dock just outside of the island's borders. We had decided that on most of these islands, we were simply going to walk around the town and perhaps sample some of the local cuisine. But then we heard about Megan's Bay in St. Thomas. Now, this place had recently been voted on Travel Channel as one of the best beaches in the entire world, so we knew we had to make an exception and go there before we'd never get another chance. We woke up nice and early. The sun was just rising over the beautiful mountains as we made our way to a minibus that was driven by a local. There was no way we could have walked there, as the bay was situated on the other side of the mountain, and the quickest route was directly over it. We needed to be back by midday approximately, so the bus driver was the best option we had. When we arrived at this beach, I was particularly stunned at the sheer beauty of this locale. Everything was lush and green. The sand was virtually pink, and the water was just north of 75 degrees. Me and my friend Paul immediately jumped in the water, swimming, talking, and having a great time, when we heard from very far away the sound of helicopter blades spinning. "Well, that's odd," I said to Paul. "How would helicopter blades spinning like that make enough noise for us to hear it from the other side of the mountain?" That's when it hit us. Either what we were hearing was a helicopter with a motor the size of an Oldsmobile, or it was gunfire. Paul shifted uncomfortably in the water. Come on, just don't think about it, dude." For all I tried, though, I just couldn't get the thought out of my head. Whatever it was that was making that noise, it had to have been a powerful assault rifle, because the noise was rather sporadic as time went on. After a while, though, it completely stopped, and we went back to our families. After Paul and I had spent some more time swimming and scuba diving with my uncle for a while, we decided to amp up the fun and rent out some kayaks. After we dragged the kayaks from the little hut and threw them into the water, we swam with them out to a reasonable distance and hopped in. Paul paddled up next to me and asked if I wanted to make a journey over to some mountains that were a little bit off in the distance, right in the center of the bay. Like the adventurous young moron I was, I said yes. We started paddling with reckless abandon towards those mountains. After paddling vigorously for about 15 minutes, however, our arms were completely numb. "Hey, Dylan, I can't go anymore, man. We need to rest." I turned around and saw his face was beet red. That's when I looked to my right and saw this little private beach. "Yo, I'm gonna go there. We can pull the boats in and catch our breath on that tiny shore." We used the last of our strength to paddle over to that tiny private beach, and we dragged the kayaks onto the shore with us. This is when I noticed that this beach had stairs running into the sides of the mountain. This is where I should explain how the entire bay was inset, so the houses are built on top of many cliffs overlooking the bay. From there, the houses had staircases that ran down to the beach, and there were two sets of stairs. One set led to a majestic-looking house that was simply beautiful, yet we could not see inside of it at all. The next house was very clearly visible because the living room wall was made entirely of glass. As we were looking up into that house, admiring its beauty, someone came home. At first, we thought it was just a local. He walked briskly into the room, then oddly turned around to stare at the door. Just as frantically, we could see 9 other men enter the room with him. They quickly huddled around the center and passed something around to each of them. Easily could have been a drug deal. We saw them stop, and Paul noticed one of the men now staring right down at us on the beach. All of them slowly turned around to face us, one by one, and my heart instantly froze in my chest. It was then that the first man went over to the door leading outside and opened it up to yell at us. I thought he was going to chastise us for being on the beach, but what he said made me start to realize this could have been much worse.
"Hey man, why don't you come on up here for a little bit? Let's talk a little."
At this point, me and Paul were frozen on the spot. "Paul," I whispered, "back away slowly. Drag your kayak in the water and paddle. Don't look back." The man was still yelling at us to come to him until he screamed,
"Well, fine then."
It was at that point we saw him make for the staircase we were at. Two dudes in the living room rushed out following suit. I had seen enough though. Me and Paul raced towards our kayaks and frantically pushed them into the water, leaving enormous divots in the shoreline. I didn't dare to look back to see if they were chasing us. We paddled until we were dead in the center of the bay. We decided that we should head back to our parents. I don't know if it was just my young, foolish mind overreacting, but something in my gut to this day tells me that if we went up to that house, I probably would have never seen my parents again. To be honest, we might have actually gone up there if not for that gunfire earlier. I mean, maybe they could have been nice, who knows? But I wasn't willing to take that chance. We got back on the cruise ship later that night, but the memory still stays with me. A while ago, I got a job at a small hospital just outside of town. I was very excited actually, as it was my first job I'd been offered since my schooling. It was just some casual work, but I was still ecstatic at the chance to work there, as the money was great. And it was the place I did my practicum at. Most of the time, I would do 12-hour shifts, around 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Sometimes I would be given 3 to 11. I didn't really care for those ones much. I was used to working late from my previous job, but I had to drive a lot further to get home from this one, and the late shifts were also usually very slow. Another reason I didn't really like them was because there were not very many people on staff, and I would get very lonely. Usually 4 nurses, 1 admin, me, and the emergency doctor. That's it. Now, being in a small hospital like this one, you see some pretty strange things come in. Some people can't make it into the city, so we've had the emergency STARS helicopter drop them in now and then. I've seen terrible things like whole families dying from accidents on the curved country roads. I've even had people bring in animals in desperation, as there were no vets nearby that could help them. This one particular night around 10 p.m., I was sitting and talking with one of the RNs about a patient's chart. Mostly, I was just wasting time until I could go home at 11. The hospital was extremely quiet. I'd only checked around 6 people into the emerge at this point. I remember I was eating a yogurt when I heard a strange noise coming from the main doors. I could see a man walking towards us. He looked mostly normal, but he had this extremely long coat on. This was strange as it was in the middle of summer. Even though it was dark out, it was still pretty warm. The RN next to me sighed and got up to go to the bathroom, leaving me to tend to our new arrival. As he drew closer though, that strange sound got louder and louder, and something caught the light. He was dragging something behind him that I couldn't quite make out, but I assumed it had to be metal by the noise it was making. Immediately, a shiver went up my spine. The man stopped at the desk. I could see his eyes were wide, and his pupils were huge. His face was pale, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a long time. I'd seen this look many times, and immediately associated it with someone who was high on something. He leaned on the desk and ran his fingers through his hair, pulling at it and grinding his teeth. Whenever people like this come in, they're usually looking for drugs. Most of the time, they'll complain of a migraine or fibromyalgia, anything we can't prove contrary of. I processed him as usual when I noticed he was getting more and more irritable as time passed by. Eventually, when I finished and pointed him toward the waiting area, he asked how long it would be. Knowing that the on-the-call doc had gone on a quick break, I estimated about half an hour. That's when his whole demeanor changed immediately. The anger on his face was obvious as he stormed over to the waiting area, which is a room between eMERGE and the front desk area with doors. As he walked away, I caught a glimpse of what he was dragging, and I came to the realization that it was a huge axe. I panicked and almost called the code over the paging system, but I didn't want him to realize. I promptly called the police on my cell phone and ran down the hall to signal to the nurses that we now had an issue. The police would have to come from 2 towns over, which took an average of 20 minutes. Of course, as we were all small girls, we didn't want to have to go near him. This man was tall and extremely muscular. Even with all of us combined, we probably wouldn't even stand a chance. I calmly walked back to the front desk and paged the doctor, asking him to call me. I waited and waited, but I never got a response. I watched the man getting more and more agitated, and soon he began yelling and screaming. I hid away, not wanting him to come back to me. We devised a plan to lock him in the waiting area. The glass there was reinforced, and the doors were heavy. That should at least hold him until the police arrived. The plan went down without a hitch, until the man realized what we'd done. He started screaming, throwing furniture around the room. He was alone, so at least we didn't have to worry about him hurting anyone. Then he started using his axe on the door and glass to the front desk area, where we were all standing and watching. I'd never been so terrified in my life. What made it even worse was the fact that he seemed to be making some headway on the door. It was at this time that the eMERGE doc walked in the front door of the hospital, sipping on a drink from the Max over the road. He saw us all huddled behind the desk and very quickly took charge of the situation. After getting all the necessary information, he disappeared toward the back entrance of eMERGE, the way ambulances bring patients in. He unlocked the door of the waiting room and tackled the man to the floor when he wasn't looking. He then proceeded to tie him up with some cable ties. He sat on the man's back until the cops arrived. I was thankful for having the young, physically fit doc with us that night. I bought him coffee every time our schedules crossed as a thank you, but I don't think it will ever be enough. As this was the second incident that went down for me as I worked a late shift, I decided to never do that again. From now on, I'm a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 worker. Much safer that way.